The Spanish tortilla. What is it? Well, Spanish tortilla, or tortilla de patatas, is a pan-fried omelet made primarily with potatoes, eggs, and onions. And it's usually served cold as an appetizer. The Spanish tortilla is a very popular appetizer served in Spain, dating back to 1817. Compared to many other traditional cultural food, being only 200 years old makes the Spanish tortilla a relatively recent development. You may wonder why it's called a tortilla, when it much more closely resembles an omelet than the tortillas you are familiar with. The reason for this is that the tortilla is derived from the root word torta, which simply means cake. The Mexican corn or flour tortilla we know in North America comes from the same root, but it's not at all related. Like most foods, there is a variety of ways to prepare a Spanish tortilla. A Spanish tortilla could taste quite a bit different depending on where you are in the world when you order one. At its core, any Spanish tortilla will primarily consist of potatoes, onions, and eggs. From there, the possibilities are quite extensive. I included some photos of different variations on ingredients and ways to serve a Spanish tortilla. The picture on the left includes parsley and tomatoes on top. The middle photo is a bit more traditional and includes some peppers added. The last photo shows how you can serve it in bite-sized pieces as an appetizer and with olives on the side. As you can see, the possible variations are nearly endless. To get a cultural experience related to the Spanish tortilla, I went and visited Top of the World in Sacramento. It seemed like they had the most authentic version of a Spanish tortilla around, and I think it was worth the drive. I decided to make this the first thing I did for my research, so that I could get a feel for what I was going for when I made my own Spanish tortilla later. Because of that, when I arrived, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I took lots of pictures while I was there to try and capture the atmosphere of the place. There were a lot of friendly people at the bar I was seated at, but unfortunately nobody seemed to speak Spanish for an interview. Having not done research yet, because it was similar to an omelet, I mistakenly assumed it would be served hot. Also interesting was that it came with several unpitted olives on the side, which I later found out is a common way to serve it in Spain. I ate one of the 2 slices they served at the restaurant, and decided to save the other for comparison once I had made my own. After trying a Spanish tortilla from Top of the World, it was time to make my own. I took some liberties in the making of my Spanish tortilla that made it unique from the Spanish tortilla I got from Top of the World. In addition to the basic potatoes, eggs, onions, milk, olive oil, and salt, I added some red and yellow peppers that we had in our fridge into the mix. I personally think it improved it for the better, even if it veered from the original recipe. The other way mine turned out differently is that my recipe called for diced potatoes. This resulted in much larger potato chunks compared to the one from Top of the World. In their version, the potatoes are sliced very thinly and delicately layered on top of each other. Now, I'll quickly go over the process of making a Spanish tortilla. First, you'll need to gather the ingredients. I've got a list here that I got from the recipe that I used, but I made some small adjustments. Their recipe calls for 6 medium potatoes, 2 small onions, in my case I used 1 large onion, 1 teaspoon of salt, 4 tablespoons of, they called for sunflower oil, I used olive oil just because that's what I had, and I think more traditional recipes use that anyway. 7 eggs, and a 1/4 cup of milk. I also put in some red and yellow peppers that we had in the house. After you finish gathering all your ingredients, the first step is to cut up the onions and potatoes. There's a few ways you can do it on the potatoes. The way that I chose was to cut off all the skins on the potatoes and dice it up into somewhat small cubes. The second step is heating the oil in a large frying pan. Then you add the potatoes and onions that you just finished cutting up, and you let it stew gently, partially covered, for about 30 minutes, just to soften up the potatoes basically. And then after that you strain the potatoes and onions through a colander into a bowl, and that's when you put in all the seasonings too that you want to add. And you beat the eggs separately in a smaller bowl, and then once that's all whisked up with the milk, you stir in the potatoes with plenty of salt and pepper, and you heat a little of the strained oil that you got from earlier into a smaller pan, and then combine everything, tip it into the pan you were just using before, and you cook it on moderate heat using a spatula to keep the shape of it. And for the last step, once it's done cooking mostly all the way through, you're going to want to invert the entire thing onto a plate. So you basically put a plate over the top of it, flip over the entire pan, and then slide it off so that it's flipped over and the other side is cooking. I had issues with this when I went to flip it, as you can see by the picture. Yeah, it made kind of a huge mess. But once I cleaned up the huge mess it made, it turned out just fine. And my family and I had it for dinner while it was still hot as a side dish, and everybody seemed to like it. And these are some of the pictures of the final product once everything was finished. And here are 5 questions for the end of my presentation. Number 1, what does the root word torta roughly translate to in English? Number 2, what is another name for the Spanish tortilla? And there's definitely more than one right answer on that one. Number 3, in what year did the Spanish tortilla likely originate? Number 4, what is one of the differences between a Spanish tortilla and a regular omelet? Number 5, what is something you might find served on the side of a Spanish tortilla? Alright, and that is it. Thanks for listening.